bienvenue à notre première soirée dans la série des soirées de graphisme. Je suis très heureuse d'accueillir Yann Chateigné et Dan Solbach pour cette conférence. Et si vous étiez dans la librairie, vous avez peut-être déjà feuilleté ce livre dont nous allons apprendre la production, toute la recherche qui était autour, donc le livre Almanach Ecart, qui est d'ailleurs déjà épuisé. Et si vous voulez un de ces exemplaires, il y a une liste à la librairie et aussi à l'accueil. Vous pouvez vous mettre sur la liste parce qu'il va être très bientôt réimprimé, comme a dit Yann. Donc il va y avoir plus d'exemplaires bientôt. Mon nom est Claire Hoffman, je suis responsable des arts visuels ici au Centre culturel suisse et je suis vraiment très heureuse qu'on peut apprendre, avoir un peu une vision de derrière les coulisses de cet ouvrage, Almanach Ecart, qui a réuni un grand nombre de personnes, de chercheurs, d'artistes autour de ce projet Ecart. Et on en a deux présents ce soir. Donc c'est Yann Chateigné qui est curateur indépendant et critique d'art et qui figure comme éditeur de ce livre. Et il est curateur associé à Canal à Bruxelles où il y a 2 semaines, il a inauguré une exposition de John M Armleder qui s'intitule It Never Ends. Et Dan Solbach, qui est graphiste et basé à Berlin et surtout à Berlin, plus vraiment à Bâle, et qui a donc fait le design et développé le concept autour de cette publication. Il travaille beaucoup avec des institutions d'art, des galeries, des artistes et en très proche collaboration avec, surtout sur des projets artistiques. Et il va nous présenter donc son concept autour de cette publication et aussi élargir un petit peu sur sa pratique en général dans la deuxième partie de la présentation. Je dois vous dire quelques informations par rapport aux mesures, donc je vais remettre mon masque dès que je repose mon micro. Donc je vais vous remercier de aussi garder votre masque pendant toute la durée de cette présentation. Et après la discussion, on va vous demander de sortir par l'impasse et on va faire ça rang par rang. Comme dans les avions, en commençant de devant. Alors merci beaucoup et bonne soirée, bonne présentation.
Good evening everyone. I'm going to do the presentation in English, although I understand French, it's a bit, I would be limiting myself if I would speak French. So I hope this is fine for everyone here. For this evening, I prepared a presentation that starts with Ecart, and then I sort of realized that there is this kind of thread going through my work, or maybe not my life, but the last 13 years or so, with John and Ecart, and I'm trying to go sort of along that. And Yann will hopefully give a lot of information about the research of the project, and then we will try and have a conversation. So let's start with the Almanach Ecart. It's the book that lies in front of us that is sadly out of print, and we're going to be reprinting it and maybe even do an English version of it. And so, yes, I thought we would start talking about the group Ecart. What was it? Ecart was an artist collective that was founded by 3 high school friends in the late 1960s. that were also friends that were doing rowing together on the Lake of Geneva, I assume. John Armleder, Claude Rychner, and Paddy Lucchini. And it sort of came out of, correct me if I'm wrong, of the group that formed around the former teacher. As also John Armleder already had an interest in fluxes and experimental music as well. I seem to remember that he met John Cage quite early, when he was still probably like a teenager. So they found this collective that was an exhibition space, an artist collective. They made performances, experimental films, publications. It was a print shop. They had an exhibition space based in the hotel Richemont, where John grew up. And yeah, so it's kind of for Geneva it was quite interesting, because Geneva at the time was not really was really out, or let's say outside the center of the art world. It was not Paris, it was not Basel, it was not Düsseldorf. And they somehow managed to establish a network of young artists, and maybe even for the first time to make art production visible in Switzerland, and not just art dissemination or presentation, sort of. So also using methods like mail art, or the publishing house that they found it was important for them to also create this network. And there was this archive that somehow came together because of a research that Lionel Bouvier, who's now the director of MAMCO, who used to run GRP Publishers, and Christoph Scherix, who now is a curator at the MoMA. They made this publication and exhibition in the late 90s, which was the first time where someone looked at Ecart, a publication that has been reprinted as well. It's the blue book here. So I think this research project, and now maybe I was teaching in Geneva 2015 to 17, and then I got to know that there was this. I heard first about this ominous book that John Armleder never finished. It was a collection of stamps, because a lot of these artists in these circles, they use stamps kind of to sort of counter the aesthetics of bureaucracy, almost like as a caricature of bureaucracy. And there was a book of stamps that was done with an artist, Hervé Fischer, and John or Ecart and Hervé Fischer wanted to do a second book, which was apparently half printed, but then somehow lost. It was never really bound or collated or made into a book, and it was kind of dormant somewhere for 30 years, 40 years. And when I was teaching there, I heard about this project, this like ominous book, and kind of got into touch with Yann also about it. And then at the same time, you were starting to establish the research project about Ecart. So
yeah, the occasion was unique. The director of the MAMCO, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Geneva. Oh yeah, I have to switch it on. It's on.
It's on? Yeah. Lionel Bouvier, the famous Swiss curator, just got appointed as director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Geneva. And I used to be the dean of the visual art department of the Geneva School of Art and Design. I think my microphone died. It's on again. Okay, fine.
So just
I think
disinfect this one and give you this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can put a mask on my mic. But
yeah, you can tell the whole story.
yeah, but I mean, I don't know the whole story, like what happened on the administrative side of the school. But it was a research. I mean, at some point, this research project came together. There was the school head, MAMCO, and the goal was to research this archive, because what was kind of incredible with this archive is that it was very messy, or let's say it was kind of done or kept by people that you would maybe consider messy today. So there's like everything is there. There's everything that they produced, everything that people sent to them, everything that they sent out, every kind of scrap. So it really is almost like a time capsule of this period, let's say the post-avant-garde in Switzerland, or maybe even internationally at the time.
Yeah, so the main challenge was to go through this immense amount of documents. I mean, when I say documents, it's really a super wide range of objects that go from works of art, actually, like works of multiple or even unique works of art that they've been producing in the context of their numerous activities from 1969, but sometimes even before, because Ecart existed before they founded the Ecart Collective or the Ecart Performance Group in November 1969, or even the Ecart Art Space or the bookshop that arrived later. They were already active since the mid-60s in the context of a former artist group called the Groupe Bois, from the name of their art teacher when they were adolescents, who had activities that were almost imperceptible, like drinking tea together, swimming on the lake, gardening, or walking in the streets, looking at the sky, in the situationist tradition. So activities that left traces, but archival traces, not works of art, but that went from artwork to very, very, I would say anecdotic, but in the good sense, like traces of their material life, like invoices, or even like traces on the paper that was on the table when they drank tea, that became the starting point of an artist book and then became an archive or something that could be reused. So from the most unique things to the most even like administrative or bureaucratic thing, and the whole life of Ecart from 69 to 1982 was put into boxes after Lionel Bouvier and Christophe Chérix did their major first retrospective of the activities of the group, but in 1997. So when they went through this archive, at the moment they were like with the eyes of curators who were at the time in the late 90s looking for specific things that resonated at the time with what they were interested in. So 20 years later, in 2017, we went to this space that you see in this picture, which is in Geneva at the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire, at the Cabinet d'Art Graphique, where exactly the same boxes were left after the first retrospective of Ecart that made the group discovered to the eyes of the general audience at the time, because in the mid-90s nobody was interested or nobody knew what Ecart was doing, because it was all these enigmatic or cryptic or situationist fluxus activities that left almost any artistic, with inverted commas, traces. No painting, no sculpture, some films, some archives, some scores of performances, but it was really like a sort of rumor in the city. It was like a sort of myth in Switzerland. This sort of Fluxus antenna in Geneva that opened in the late 60s. And the boxes were there with what remained from the first sort of exploration of the activity. And we proposed the museum and Lionel to take over the archive and to kind of reinterpret it, or to go through it again and see what could be found with our eyes from today.
So our strategy to navigate the archive and put it finally into a publication was then to do a yearbook of Ecart, because there was a tiny publication that I did in '73 or so, which was the Ecart yearbook, and so we decided to use this as a sort of rules for a game, where we would find a document that fit to each date of the year. So the year is kind of a fictional year spanning 12 years, or 13. So we, in the same spirit for this presentation, we just chose to kind of select all the 6th, whatever, of the year, so January 6th, February 6th, and so forth, to give you a selection of the documents. So here, the first in January, you see that it's an invoice. So there's a lot of invoices from the bookshop that Ecart did. They were ordering and selling books through a very wide network at the time, which allowed them to be in touch with other avant-garde scenes networks. And the other letter here is, it's another invoice, I guess. Yeah? I mean, there's like 365 documents. I don't know every one by heart. So.
Yeah, and what's very interesting is that what we discovered is that yes, that Ecart was part of a network at the moment when art became kind of global, or through, of course, an artistic activity that we will discover later, through mail art mainly, but also other kind of concept forms or instructions, performances at distance, etc. But also through their activities as curators, as book publishers, and especially as booksellers, they became a sort of archive before we used, or because we went through this amount of document as an archive after they stopped their activity. It was already the idea to accumulate the most interesting activities and traces of experimental art forms at the moment that could be gathered in Switzerland to share what happened in the whole world in the different scenes that they were interested in, like happening, concept art, minimal art, fluxus, experimental music, mail art, experimental poetry, sound poetry, sound art, etc., etc., etc. So what we kind of inherited, all these boxes full of documents, was partly the archives of their collective, the archive of their library, but also the objects that were kind of selling at the moment, that were not sold yet, and that we had also to inventory. So it was already a sort of attempt to kind of document what was happening at the moment that was the most interesting, and especially the artist publication, for sometimes publications that were released that on 10 copies or 3 copies, 50 copies, and they were looking at this all the time, trying to find copies of everything that was published at the moment. So the invoicing back and forth, like receiving invoices and sending invoices to people, was a huge part of the activity, artistic activity.
Yeah, so somehow the clearest trace of the network that they established.
And the design of the invoices is super interesting, and also the way they were expressing.
Yeah. On the left, there's this. You see the first joker that we had to sometimes make these jokes because we couldn't always find a document for each date. And so each month there's a set of jokers that, in this case, it's a set of postcards that Ecart made. I can't be, yeah, Gerald Minkoff, who was in the wider circle of Ecart. And on the right, there's, maybe you can explain this a bit better.
Yeah, it's there's a mix, the whole mix in the book of documents that are kind of, I would say, major works or major figures, and minor documents or I would say indexes or traces of or evocation allegories, or I don't know how to say them. But this letter is a letter from the section de l'Aviron du Club Nautique de Genève, writing to John M Armleder's parents that their son will go on the lake and will go down the Rhône, the river that goes from the lake to directly to Lyon, and saying that their son won't be insured for any risk that is taken going down to this trip. So it's an evocation of the origins of Ecart that started as a group of friends swimming on the lake, doing aviron on the lake, considering their activities without hierarchies in between daily activities, sports, and artistic activity.
Oh yeah, the inter-arts document that we just talked about this before.
Yeah, so the one idea with the book was to reveal that Ecart, as I would say, with inverted commas again, and in a positive sense, a minor collective, like a minor, a sign of a minor history. Lionel Bouvier, in the interview that we published in the book, says it's a parallel history. So I would say it's an alternative way to, or it's a way to revise or to read history of art, and especially history of the neo-avant-garde, the avant-garde of the 1960s, considering that at some point in art history there's no center anymore, and the center is everywhere and nowhere in the meantime. So they understood this very soon, considering that they had two options when they started Ecart. Either they had to go to Paris or New York or London or anywhere, or to Germany, or they could take account of the fact that art became information, art became books, art became performances that you can do at distance, and you can travel without works and perform yourself. So the production means totally changed at some point with conceptual art and artist books and etc. And that they could bring the scene to them. They could like create a new center in the network, and the book reveals that their archive, what they collected or they just accumulated, everything they received from anywhere in the world became an archive of themselves, but the whole network they were part of at the moment. So this is a document from Lyon, from Interarts and Patrick Alton, inviting them to show a film or proposing them to show something in Geneva, to create an exchange between Lyon and Geneva. And that reveals with the hundreds of other letters like this, showing that they were constantly in contact with places similar to them everywhere in the world in the context of, I don't know, artist publication, experimental cinema, performance, mail art, etc.
Yeah, and then the other one also reveals something that is very constant in the archive, is that they received a lot of invoices that were never paid or lost or somewhere. So they received another letter with someone complaining about the missing money. On the left, that's a very important part of Ecart. It's the mail art kind of arm, or whatever you would call it. This is Ruth Wolf-Rehfeld, she and her husband were mail artists in the GDR, and kept, there was a form of exchange beyond the Iron Curtain, so to say. And on the right, it's a selection of jokers again for the month of August, the kind of holiday month, because similar to other spaces, in August there was just not much happening. That's why we didn't find a lot of documents that were really matching there. So we had there was this selection of postcards, alpine images that kind of also express a certain randomness in this archive. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's actually the early documents from the group. Wow, no.
Yeah, what we did is that we created categories like notes or network, jokers, etc. And all these categories were the way we kind of arranged the huge amount of documents we were all selected in the archive. So considering that we're a group of researchers composed of a graphic designer, an art historian, another art historian, artists. I guess we should mention them if it's not. So Elisabeth Jobin, who is a Swiss art historian, who was the main researcher at the core of the network of researchers. She's now a curator at the Musée Cantonal des Beaux-Arts de Lausanne. Pierre Leguillon, who is an artist and many other things, who was already very interested since many years in all these kind of ephemeras and works, and close to John M Armleder as well in Geneva. Émilie Parendeau, who is a French artist and researcher who is doing a PhD at the moment on the idea of score in Fluxus performances, who researched specifically the performances by Ecart. Mathieu Copeland, who researched music in the archive of Ecart, and myself. And I kind of dedicated myself to one specific medium in the archive, which was the written documents, written by hand, and especially the notebooks. So I was very interested in kind of documents who kind of reveal the whole very material economy of the artist collective. So these are notes for the preparation of an activity that they would organize together collectively. So the very basic things that they would need to create their works. So they had activities in nature. So they had an exhibition on ice, for example, in the mountains. A very, very, very nice, beautiful documentation that you can find in the Blue Book, actually, where they created works that were made of ice or snow, or I don't know, pines, grass, water, etc. And so they organized these sort of camps in the sort of scout tradition, but very experimental, super poetic. And in the meantime, John Armleder was noting his dreams. So you had these two kind of archives, one a daily archive and a night archive, a sort of diurne and nocturne activity. And what was very nice is that, so I read the whole books of the dreams that he did at this moment, and he was dreaming about Ecart. So he was writing things that he saw in his dreams that were projects that they did with Ecart that failed, and they got a fight together. And so at this moment I was interested in starting to understand the relation between what was real and what was dreamt in the archive, and then led me to the writing of the text that is included in the book.
Then we have a postcard by Dan Graham, who's recommending films also related to publication, and an exhibition that he made with Ecart.
It's distributed by MAMCO. It's published by Ecart, which is very interesting, which means that John Armleder considers that Ecart is still active. So sometimes he decides that Ecart becomes a publisher of something that is related to the archive. The two other members of Ecart, the founding members, kind of quickly went out of the art world in the sense that we consider it. One is not is not here anymore, Claude Rychner, but Patrick Lucchini is still with us, but decided at some point that the art world as it is was not for him, so he decided to do something else, totally different, which is also a very interesting thing that we discovered in the process of the research, is that mail art and experimental art and all this fluxus constellation of persons or the situations, traditions, also makes us kind of relativize what is a career or what is a work, or because some artists that I included in the book did this for a period of time as a sort of parenthesis in between other kind of professional activities. Especially the mail art it was amateur in the positive sense of the term. It was a work of love. It was totally out of the market. It was a way to transgress what the institutions were offering at the time. So considering the postal service as a space of production and as an exhibition space in a certain sense. So the stamp thing is super related to this idea of an alternative kind of form of communication. And Hervé Fischer, who was interested in this kind of sociological aspects, decided to do a book about it, entitled Art et communication marginale. And Ecart decided or proposed him to do a second one, a sort of addition to the first one, to complete it, to fill the blanks. But they added more and more stamps. And then when Ecart split it in the early 80s, the book was not finished. So they had a huge fight, and the book disappeared. And it was found in an attic in Armleder's parents' hotel. That was not their parents' hotel because they sold it many years ago, but they found it. It was covered by bird shit. So they cleaned it and decided to print it. Not to print it, it was already printed.
Yeah,
to bound it, to print a cover and to bound it very simply. And then when we finally said, "Hey John, finally the book is done," and he said, "Yes, but you don't have the text." So apparently there are some text that was supposed to go with it that we will maybe found in 10 years from now.
Maybe, yeah. So the selection ends with another example of mail art, which is the Muriel Olesen and Gerald Winkhoff, who appeared before, again from the sort of wider network of people that kind of would maybe constitute Ecart. Regarding the design, because this is a graphic design talk, I want to, for me it was most important that the document is the center of the book or the layout. And so when we decided to have the Almanach as a reference, of course an Almanach has you can see the date, you can see you can read kind of everything in one day, maybe not the weather, but where the moon is and so on. And I was sort of hesitating to have all this lexicalic information on it, and I remember there was a discussion between us where should I make some categories more visible or so. But in the end I just decided to place a document on the page as if the page was a scanner. So there is a grid in the publication, but then the grid is also quickly ignored, or the grid sort of more is, how do you say this, it's just hugs the document. Maybe that is nice. So here you can see that what this results in, the different white spaces can be.
And what was immediately interesting is that by not choosing the documents but choosing the dates, it created associations that were always surprising, and sometimes meaningful, sometimes not meaningful at first sight. But we try to maintain this sort of logic of this solution that we found to our problem was how to select among these thousands of documents that we're interested in and how to range them. So the sort of systematic that we decided created a sort of not random but more like rational way to
I mean, I remember we had this Trello where we all uploaded images, and then everybody had a vote, and we could vote on the document which one was the favorite. But then also Elisabeth, because she was the main researcher, she said she had like sort of the main vote where she could say, okay, I believe that this is a very important document and it has to stay, no matter if it looks boring to you, but it is, we have to keep it. So it was, the process was like we had this kind of this set of rules which were like playing a game, and then we had this game amongst ourselves. And so this is an example of the tea book that Yann spoke about before, this livre du thé, which was never realized, or maybe it was also never supposed to be realized, or it was just like that, yeah. And then there's also 4 texts or interventions, maybe kind of questionnaires for art historians that were specifically looking at a certain date, a certain document, which we inserted as A4 copies into the book.
Yeah, because the question of the text was from the beginning a problematic that we had to solve, because very soon our idea was to publish something that would be based on the pictures, also to contrast with the first monograph on Ecart, that was the reference monograph that was already published, but even like republished and translated into English. So it was a reference book about Ecart and was based on a chronology and mainly on essays, like academic essays that was telling the story of Ecart. So if you want to know what Ecart was, you have to buy this book. If you want to know what Ecart wasn't, you have to buy this one. So in contrast, we decided to create something much more anachronic, so to break the chronology and to create something much more playful and kind of experimental, but also to place the text beside, or to place the text behind the pictures, or to really put the pictures at the front of the book. So the 2 solutions we found was to ask some persons to write essays, but on a very subjective level. So art historians or academics who would shed a light on very specific aspects of Ecart that is mostly unknown, like Ecart and film, for example, written by Adina May, an amazing art historian. And the text is fantastic. It's really like something you would never imagine about this artist collective who was mainly known for their artist book and their performances. So he's writing a super interesting essay about Ecart and technologies and medias and McLuhan and etc. Or an essay about really like the question of not Ecart, but what's all around Ecart, the whole network of artists at the moment, and artist collective and artist-run spaces. So to work around the whole center. And these texts were interviews that we did with people who didn't know Ecart, but who worked for many years on artist collective archives all around the world. So in Japan, in Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, South America, and Switzerland. And so these interviews were included in relation with one picture they chose as the point of reference for our conversation on on the photocopied paper.
Yeah. So, and then I guess how are we on time? Okay. So, I guess is this the last slide? It's sort of. Also, I decided to pick up on the newsletters that Ecart produced. You see them on the left. Quite hard to read, but kind of took that typeface and with a close friend of mine, Fabian Haab, made that into a legible typeface that was working for the text. So it's sort of an extra kind of. I mean, I think the whole idea of this book was kind of to try to get into the spirit of Ecart, and sort of by having this playful method of selecting the documents to sort of and this collective research that we kind of did. So to sort of keep this alive in a way. I mean, that's also why we chose that the book itself is this. It's like a soft cover that has a very thin paper stock, and that doesn't, because that's not like a tombstone where the history is like between two thick covers and then discarded. So kind of has remained flexible somehow. So maybe we run through this really quickly, but it's like I kind of realized that there was this thing that Ecart was really early present in my life as a graphic designer. So I was thinking about this event that we did in 2007. I was running a fanzine publishing house with two friends, which we started. I was 18 years old, and then we somehow got invited to be at Art Basel in 2007 at the booth of Ecart, because until this day, maybe that was 20, John, he still keeps Ecart sort of alive, at least at this booth that he has, where he shows artists from the network, but also young artists from Geneva. And what we did was we got together with Nieves, who is a fancy publisher, and we had this booth, where like people hung out, and I think were even smoking and drinking beer. It was kind of and so. But then the Shucho was this, as I said, this fancy publisher. And this kind of out of Shucho came this exhibition space in Jersey. So I also actually did an exhibition space. And there I kind of realized that, going through these pictures today, that one of the first exhibitions was with Team 404. That was John Armleder's class in Braunschweig at the moment. So what they did this boxing club because it was also, I think, the the Euro Championship. So the Basel Boxing Club was closed because of the public viewing zone or something, and then they installed themselves in the exhibition space and were also training and boxing and so on. And I saw Johnson in his pictures again. And then here is the next connection. So through Daniel Baumann, who was a co-founder and curator of New Jersey, I established a long and until this day lasting collaboration, which leads me to a project which is this Identity for Kunst oder Zurich, which now we talk about graphic design, but here as well, it was the idea was that I would kind of create a system that is very simple, and it's so simple to a degree where only I could do these posters. So it was kind of the strategy of securing a continuous job, sort of, because it's like so simple that everything relies on an interpretation of an exhibition, and in my eyes, I'm the only one that can do this. So, so what we did here is we, again with Fabian, we sort of took a sketch of Walter Kelch, who was a Soviet typographer and early also teacher of typography, was also a teacher of Frutiger, I believe. We took a sketch and kind of built a custom typeface on that with a certain clue or error that, to me, allowed me to really typeset very tightly, but also expressed a certain mistake that is kind of something that Daniel's interest is also always sort of circling around, this idea of errors or maybe being a bit off or some. Oops. So yeah. And what's nice about this is that I found, and then I somehow started to do posters. I was like, from publications, I started to suddenly be a poster designer, and I had to kind of focus on color. Because if you work in publications, you just create a system that I believe should just work in black and white. It doesn't have anything to do with color, but with a poster it's completely different. And I also think that my publication design is quite different to my poster work. So these are all done in silkscreen. These are all digital images, but it's nice to be able to work with screen printers and create something that has like a different quality than just an offset printed poster. But then we also, I get to do publications like this one on Androvequa, which was also kind of a project that I would have never dreamed of 13 years ago, but suddenly I'm there and doing it. This one about playground concepts by artists, or like artistic concepts by architects. And currently we're working on a publication on the work of Ida Ekblad, who's a Norwegian painter. So that was this summer where we are sort of like work in process thing. So now, kind of getting towards the end, I thought maybe I could show another work in progress, which is somehow connected to Ecart, I thought. It's a publication on a series of work by a British artist collective from the mid-90s to the sort of mid-aughts, called Bank, and the publication will be published very soon by Lens, it's a new publisher from Italy, and it's edited by Tenzin Bashi and Gaia Dejean, who's somewhere here. So yes, here's some documents that Gaia found in the archive of Bank, just to give an introduction. These are the two exhibitions that Gaia and Tenzin curated in both Elaine, that was an off space in Basel, and 13 here in Paris. And so what the work is, the faxback service that the Bank did was they took press releases from galleries and corrected them as a sort of proofreading service or correction service, and faxed them back. Of course, no one asked them to do this, but it's really quite interesting because here as well, it's in a way it's another time capsule of a very specific period in contemporary art, which was kind of the rise of YBA, and then Bank had a residency in New York where they did the same project, where you would see sort of how like younger galleries established themselves in New York at the time. So it kind of provides, same as the Ecart Archive book does, it kind of provides an insight into a period or a scene that wasn't really, or it's not yet really historicized. So yeah, that's just some examples. So this will be published very soon. I have to give the images to color correction this week. And then this is kind of a first, but I also became a publisher again, and so this is, I'm doing a publishing house in Georgia and Tbilisi. And it's called Kona Books. Kona meaning it's like a bundle. So the first publication, it happened quite fast. It just was being printed this weekend. It's so doing the publishing house with Lisa Offerman, the blonde lady who's a gallerist in Tbilisi, and Nina Afrediani, who's an art historian. And the publication is, the first one is with Ketuta Alexi-Metrishvili. So here's just some images that I got sent. It was on Pressly. We're printing this in Tbilisi because we have to reach a certain price point where it's available for people in Georgia. Because in Georgia there's not really an art publishing scene or market or whatsoever. It's that if you import a book there, it's going to cost 40 euros, and a median salary is 300 euros. So no one can buy. I mean, a regular person cannot really buy an art book there. So we're trying to produce there and produce them quite cheaply so that we reach a certain price point where we can actually distribute books. And at the same time, so the books are like Georgian and English. We're also now trying to get an international distributor. So this publication is a collection of the latest work of Ketuta Alexi-Metrishvili, who's a Georgian American photographer, artist, or artist working with photography. And the text by Kirsty Bell, who's an American art historian and writer. So this will be published actually at the end, I think, at the end of this week. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, you're also welcome to ask them in French. Maybe someone, if it's, yeah, can translate as well.
Sorry, maybe I didn't get it during your speech, but was there a particular reason why you chose those symbols which are astrological references somehow?
Yeah, it's actually good because we had to somehow, because we made these categories for the work, like the invites, the mail art, we kind of had keeping with the idea of the Almanach to get have some kind of some icons that would relate to these categories to make them clear. But at the same time, it's a bit also it remains abstract because I mean in a 400-page book, I don't know really if you would remember what the icon was in the beginning when you've reached page 400. But so it's sort of a play on that, and then as well we use a symbolism that was kind of also keeps popping up in the work of Ecart, which is somehow, I mean, you have to, this is like the late 60s, the early 70s. The Summer of Love kind of arrived a bit later in Switzerland. So Ecart, I mean, just they're like hippies, right? So the images that they used, also there was an imprint for the publication, it was called Double Sphinx. It's very esoteric in a way, so that's why we kind of decided to use these astrological symbols for those categories. Yeah.
It's also a reference to the Almanach story itself. Because in an almanac you can find all the information about the moons, about how to, and by pure chance we had 12 categories, and we were looking for a way to put the categories a little bit behind the pictures and not on the pictures, like to not make it too academic or too didactic. And we were looking for signs, so we were looking at should we create new signs, and then we realized that we had already this existing symbols that in our, to our knowledge, never been used by Ecart, but perhaps neither in this kind of way to arrange an archive, to arrange it not by date or by, I don't know, by theme or by, I don't know, by medium, but by astrological symbols. So we associated every category to a symbol of the zodiac, like action, which were the scores of the performances, or business, who were the documents related to the economic activity of Ecart, or deadline, who was the category where they were invited to participate in the exhibition, but most of the time never answered, or answered too late, or answered the wrong way. So it's very interesting, etc., etc.
I think you should deal with the cliches which you that you're used to those astrologers.
Yeah, there might be a subtext like this, but this has yet to be found by the readers.
Yeah, I was wondering, it feels a lot that it was really a community that, I mean, not only the content of this book, but also the way that you approached this project. You built a community around it, and also extended this community by inviting others to interact. And then you, it feels like a combination of a set of quite strict rules and then a lot of playfulness. And how do you sort of open up all so this aspect of insider jokes and maybe all this exchange that feels so rich and lively when you talk about it? And so what are the clues that you can get also from the sort of from the book, or from the results, or how do you like insert this sort of backstory within the way that you edited the work?
Yeah, I mean, there's not every document, but a lot of documents have an extended caption. So there's a caption for every document that really says what date, what are the persons involved, and what is it. And then there's sometimes an extended caption that gives a backstory to the document. May it be that it relates to a film distributor from the time, or exhibition space in Lucerne, or a series of performances that the group was doing. And then as well, there's a system where you can kind of continue this path by going to other documents. So we reference other documents in these extended captions. So I guess that's a way to kind of explain what you see without becoming too didactic or too academic, but still giving a bit of context. Yeah.
And yes, it's true that we wanted to kind of mirror the collective activity of Ecart, who itself kind of disappeared behind this idea of the network or the collective or the cooperation. And Armleder himself also wrote texts about the fact that his work could have been done by someone else, but he also did works by other others, and it doesn't matter. What matters is the experience of the viewer or the experience of the reader. So we also placed the names in little and the pictures in bigger, so also to kind of enhance this visual and aesthetic and I don't know, sensual or physiological experience of the pictures. And we invested also a lot of time and of course money also in the treatment of the pictures themselves to make them very present in the book. As sometimes some pictures when you go through the book, sometimes you don't know if it's like in 2 or 3D, so it's really sometimes quite intense. Work before the book project started, all the persons involved were already researching or had acquaintances or were already working with Ecart, Archive, or John, or were teaching about something else or researching something very similar. So we kind of just created a context for these persons to interact, and we had lots of discussions and lots of sometimes of disagreements on how to work together. So the part of the research was also a way to learn how to cooperate and to find a way to create our own rules of production. And in the end, we discovered that what we wanted to do was not to publish the result of our research, but to create something in the context of an academic research that was financed by a very prestigious institution, and to took this time and money and opportunity to create something out of this context that would look like us, that would not be a way to celebrate Ecart or to, I don't know, magnify an archive or to place it on the market. That was to be our collaboration in between us and with Ecart and Armleder, who is still the owner of the archive actually. It's deposited now at the MAMCO. It was deposited at MAMCO Genève for a while, but it was really a matter of doing something together that would be special. And what's interesting is that we created something new, this book, and when the book went out in the world, after all these white nights of corrections and verifications and trying to make a book that would have no mistake, actually we received several feedbacks from the readers or the artists that were involved, so the more than 250 artists involved in the book, that sent us, or some people who were not involved in the book but around, corrections or compliments or new things that we didn't find, that are not in the archive. So it created a new network, a little bit like in Martin Beck's last night work, you know, that he did a sort of constitution of this famous event that took place in a loft in New York in the 80s, and then he did a book, and the book was corrected by the whole network of persons who were present this night. Then he did another book, and then he did a film, and it's a never-ending process actually. It's like, that's what is beautiful with artistry, or when you work with archive, or when you deal with all these things that had to do with memory, that it could be rewritten forever.
I mean, we just always get back to this exhibition title of the show in Brussels at the moment. It's just like, it never ends.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing with John as well. What I think is interesting about this, if you look at John's work, what I think is so interesting, I mean, it's a bit, okay, Ecart was like 3 people, but of course the main person out of this was, or is John Armleder, because he's also the person that kept this going and maintained it, and is of course the entered the contemporary art world and market. But what's interesting with his work is, I think, that it's really everything matters and nothing matters at the same time. So there's no hierarchy, and at the same time there's this generosity to allow everything to enter. And I think that's like somehow with this book, it's just, you have an invoice next to a drawing, next to a tiny piece of paper that no one knows what it is, and it's all there on the same level, which I think is really beautiful. Well,
That's another question.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, Yann. Thank you for your interest and for coming. If you're still thirsty for archival material, please come to the opening on Saturday of our show Annuaire, Je ne m'ennuie pas, on m'ennuie, where there is a lot of archival work, a little bit different than this, but also a lot to peek and sneak in.